So today in class, we talked about how when a neuron sends an action potential to the next neuron, how does that second neuron decide whether or not it should respond? So there's kind of two ways that a neuron can talk to the next neuron. It can make it be more likely to fire a signal, or it can make it less likely to fire a signal. So if it's more likely, it's exciting the next neuron, and if it's less likely, it's inhibiting the next neuron. And we talked in class today about how that second neuron is able to kind of pull in information from lots of different places. So it can integrate signals coming in from lots of different neurons and lots of different areas in the brain. And we talked about how that second neuron is able to actually be more likely to have a response if the neurons consistently talk to it in an insistent way. So if one neuron is talking to another neuron and it fires many action potentials in a row, that second neuron is way more likely to fire because it'll have kind of an additive effect and it'll be more likely to fire. Or if it's an inhibitory synapse, it'll be less likely to fire in response to any kind of input coming in from a different neuron. So it has to sum up everything it hears over time. It has to sum up everything that it gets over space from different areas of the brain. And it's really important about the timing. So when the signals actually get to that second neuron, it's super, super important. Because if they come in at the same time, it's coincident activity, then you'll end up having the cell respond in a more robust way than if the same kind of information came in splattered. So basically it's meaning that one action potential really doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything in the next cell. It's kind of background noise. But if all of the neurons coming in, those signals are all kind of saying the same thing in an insistent way, it's like you being in a crowded stadium and you're able to actually hear what everybody's saying if they're all talking at the same time, saying like a chant, a go team at the same time. So that was pretty cool today. And we talked about how some synapses maybe can be more important than others and cancel each other out sometimes. Just basically reiterating how complicated this whole thing is. Because every cell has between 10,000 and 100,000 synapses on it. That is an awful lot of opportunities for communication with the next cell. And also, it kind of goes to show you how robust the next cell's processing capability has to be in terms of figuring out, am I supposed to be less likely to fire or more likely to fire? And we also talked about the fact that being inhibited actually is a really important way of communicating in the nervous system. It's not always one neuron tells the next neuron to fire. And sometimes it's super important whether the next neuron is inhibited. So think about this. If you have a neuron that can either be a go neuron or a stop neuron, and it tells the next neuron to go or stop, then if you stimulate a stop neuron, then that's going to stimulate another stop neuron. You're going to have a double stop. So if you stop the stopper, inhibit the inhibitor, you're actually giving a go signal to that final neuron, and action will happen. And so in terms of the complexity of the nervous system, this is why we end up with these wiring diagrams with lots of different circuits and things coming in or out with all of these things in mind. So the type of channels that are there to receive the input from a neurotransmitter and the type of things that it can do in that next cell is a myriad of effects that it can have. So as parents, how is this applicable to us? It's applicable because we need to realize that timing of things is really important, and some of that is developmentally regulated. So myelin is a way of making the axons faster, and this is a developmental process. So myelin is the last kind of stage of brain development, and it is a marker of actual brain maturity. And it's correlated with a lot of developmental events, such as being able to, instead of kids just like flopping their whole arm, when myelination, kind of the onset of myelination of these pathways, they're able to have more fine motor control or learning and memory, as the hippocampus, which is responsible for short-term memory and memory consolidation, when that becomes myelinated, or those pathways do, then kids start to be able to actually remember more things. So being aware that they're not just little adults that have fully capable kind of working nervous systems in the same way that adults are, but instead they're on this continuum where, yes, synapses are forming and then they're having more synapses that they need, and that these synapses are gradually being pruned away and the excess ones gotten rid of. You keep the ones that you're using and maintaining. And then for myelination, this idea that you're going to use the myelination as a way to time precisely when the signals get to the next neuron. That's important to understand that myelination takes time. It takes decades. The last thing that we have to be myelinated is our prefrontal cortex, which not coincidentally is responsible for kind of judgment and planning and organization, attention, these things that we think of as a mature individual, totally regulated by executive functioning and processing that happens in the prefrontal cortex, which we know is the last thing to become myelinated. So this might happen in mid-20s. So this idea that the kids are on a continuum, we're growing, we're developing, but that there's still within that this restructuring that can happen, and this kind of maintaining of the synapses that you would like to have happen by practice. Super important concept. Also knowing that they may not be able to act like a mini adult. This is really important too. The prefrontal cortex, for example, is there at birth, and it is definitely got lots of cells and lots of synapses, and we just regulate over time in a process what we keep and what is no longer useful to us and get rid of, because the brain is never going to have any cell there that it doesn't use and use efficiently. The brain's all about efficiency. We're not going to waste resources and energy. We're not going to waste our supplies on a neuron that's just sitting there taking up space. The body doesn't work like that. If it's not if it's not functionally relevant, then there's no reason for that structure to be there. There's no such thing as like a placeholder in the brain. A cell is either used or it is pruned away and gotten rid of. So I love the synapse. It's my favorite part about the brain and the cool stuff that you can do and modulate it. So, the drugs that we know about, a lot of them work at the synapse. So they'll increase certain neurotransmitters, or they'll decrease certain receptors on the second cell, or they'll block the reuptake of the neurotransmitter into the first cell. And it's a really powerful tool that we have in order to kind of modulate what happens on that second cell in particular, whether it has the summative experience that can be changed to make it more or less likely to fire. Super cool. Join us every day in May for a new video.